And our breaking news report tonight about what Rudy Giuliani had to say about the Mueller investigation. Sean Hannity on Fox News tonight asked Rudy Giuliani the big question. What would happen if the president is subpoenaed to testify? If the president refuses to agree to an interview with the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller has told the president's lawyers that he might or could then subpoena the president. Because of that, Sean Hannity asked that question tonight. What if the president is subpoenaed? And Rudy Giuliani gave this answer.
If they issue a subpoena, that will be unprecedented in the sense that it's pretty clear that a president can't be subpoenaed to a criminal proceeding about him. Now, why is that? And fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, we have the real life circumstance going on that the founding fathers thought about, which is a president cannot be distracted by a criminal investigation. You can always prosecute him after. They can get him when he leaves the White House. You could always prosecute him after. But I could not, if Mueller said to me tomorrow, bring him in 2 hours like you want, no questions that you don't want, and we're pretty much ready to clear him. I could not go to the President of the United States and say, take 2 days off to get ready for that and screw the whole thing with North Korea. How can any American do that? He's our president. He is going to negotiate, I believe, a non-nuclear situation on the Korean Peninsula.
Nobody thought about it. Here, all right.
And you're going to interfere with that?
Jill Wine-Banks, Rudy Giuliani clearly does not remember that President Nixon was conducting the Vietnam War every day of your investigation about President Nixon. But to go to Rudy Giuliani's line saying a president can't be subpoenaed to a criminal proceeding about him.
Apparently, Rudy doesn't remember the law either. The Supreme Court said in very clear terms that the president had to comply with a subpoena. Now, that was a subpoena for his documents, not for testimony. So in that regard, it is undecided about testimony. But there is no reason that a court would distinguish between the two. And if Donald Trump has time to play as much golf as he plays and to have as much executive time as he has time to prepare for this. This reminds me of Richard Nixon saying, "I am not a crook." Well, we know how that ended. And he's going to have to find the time to defend himself. He's going to have to find the time. And the other thing that Rudy said is that you can always get him after he's out. Yes, clearly you can indict the president after he's out of office. But there is a statute of limitations that could run during that time, and there is a right to a speedy trial. And unless he waives those, that won't work.
And Jonathan Chait, we clearly see the strategy developing here. Rudy Giuliani, earlier in the day, had said, I thought, something reasonable about this, which was he would like to delay any interview with the special prosecutor until after the summit involving North and South Korea, which could be within the next month or so. That sounded to me like a reasonable delay for a reasonable reason, and the courts grant delays for lesser reasons all the time. Fine. But tonight, that's not what Rudy Giuliani was saying. He was emotionalizing his response to how the president would respond to a subpoena by adding North Korea in there after laying down the legal doctrine that can't be found anywhere outside of Rudy Giuliani's head at the moment, that the founding fathers made sure that the president would not be distracted by a criminal investigation. Founding fathers never did that. And we have in our recent history seen two presidents distracted very strongly, not to mention the Reagan special prosecutor. This has become almost a standard of presidencies now.
Right. And let's be honest, Donald Trump is the most distractible president we've ever had in the history of the United States. It's been widely and repeatedly shown that he can't sit through intelligence briefings, can't absorb written materials of longer than a few bullet points at once, has no patience for any of this stuff, and watches hours and hours of television, which he reveals to the country daily through his Twitter feed by live tweeting Fox and Friends. So he's more poorly positioned than anyone ever to hold this office to say he's too busy to sit down for a legal proceeding. He's obviously not.
And Joyce Vance, Barack Obama, uniquely among recent presidents, is the only one who managed to run his entire presidency without a special prosecutor investigating anything in the Obama administration. But the special prosecutors investing presidential administrations and the presidents themselves have been a distraction, to put it mildly, that most recent presidents have had to put up with.
They have, and Giuliani seems to have manufactured this legal doctrine that you can't bother a president out of thin air. But what's clear, Lawrence, is that Mueller came to this fight fully loaded for bear. He probably saw the subpoena fight coming from the moment he was appointed, brought over from the Solicitor General's office at the Justice Department, one of the most highly esteemed Supreme Court practitioners at the Justice Department, someone who will capably litigate the subpoena issue, someone who will be fully up to speed on the nuances of the issue. And it seems clear that Mueller, who after all has provided to the president's lawyers the possibility that a subpoena would be forthcoming and made it clear that that's part of his possible arsenal of tools that he'll use, he has obviously already made the decision that he can win that fight.
Let's listen to what Rudy Giuliani said when Sean Hannity asked him about the special counsel's investigators possibly interviewing Ivanka Trump or Jared Kushner. Let's listen to this.
If they do Ivanka, which I doubt they will, the whole country will turn on him. They're going after his daughter.
What about his son-in-law? They've talked about him.
I guess Jared is a fine man, you know that. But men are, disposable. But a fine woman like Ivanka, come on.
Gene Robinson, the president's so-called lead lawyer, is saying that his son-in-law, president's son-in-law, is disposable.
Well, the president, at the end of all this, will have a great issue for appeal, inadequate representation. I mean, because it's like, this is the best he has. I mean, again, so you have to just take this with the knowledge that Rudy Giuliani, in some parts of this interview, is just not making sense. It's just totally off the wall. That said, I have said before, and will say again now, that any competent lawyer, I think, would not ever let President Trump sit down for that interview if they could possibly help it, including throwing themselves bodily between him and Mueller. And as evidence, look at that train wreck on Fox and Friends last week that we talked about then. So if he does have an interview, I think he just has to take the fifth. He can't have an open-ended interview. He'll confess to 3 felonies before the first bathroom break. 3 felonies that Mueller didn't even know about.
Jill, we need your reaction to what Giuliani just said about the country would turn on them if they dared question Ivanka Trump. But Jared, he's disposable.
That wasn't the part I responded to so much. I don't know if I was on camera, but flames were coming out of me because what does he mean? Ivanka has a White House position. She's an advisor to the president. And what is this business about? She's a woman. She can't be questioned. She's an advisor to the president, and that is the most sexist thing I've heard in recent times. I'm outraged.
But I don't think any of us were surprised to hear that sort of thing from Rudy Giuliani. Jonathan Chait, Eugene Robinson, Jill Wine-Banks, Joyce Vance, thank you very much for joining us in our breaking news coverage of this tonight.